go and check that last email that came, because that will affect whether or not we can request our children to be put together if they are separated through this process.
Thank you.
Again, I'm not saying anything against you guys, but I want everybody to know.
No, thank you for that comment. Obviously, not connected to the work that we're doing. Just want to make that clear,
Yes,
but thank you for the comment.
Public service announcement.
Okay. So thank you very much for those questions. And again, there will be time at the end. So it's important for us to put the work that we're doing here today in the context of the history of Montgomery County Public Schools. Some of the information, all the information I'll be going through is in the packet that you have with you, so you can follow along. Once again, we are looking across the district. This is an incredibly large district. One of the largest districts in the country, as a matter of fact, and if you start to remove the urban districts, it is really one of the largest. So over 200 schools, 165,000 plus students, and what has brought us here today is continued growth. The issues around overcrowded schools, changing program needs, changing demographics, and proximity to schools. There's 17 clusters and 2 consortia. It's an incredible history when you look at the growth from 1950, when you had under 25,000 students, and today you've got over 165,000 students. There was a period of incredible growth in the 1950s and 60s, and then there was actually a bit of a decline in the 70s. A lot of that had to do with decreasing household sizes, women returning to the workplace. And then over the period of 1980s into 2000, 2010, increasing suburbanization, in particular the growth of the Metro DC area, which has been tremendous. One of the fastest growing metro regions when you compare it to anything else in the United States. So continued growth over time. And a lot of that growth was accommodated by new schools, reopening of schools, or expansions and additions to schools. And then, as you can see, going forward to 2025, continued growth of schools. And at the same time, you have a lot of change to the population of Montgomery County. Population that really began to diversify throughout the 1970s and 1980s, and you can see it quite clearly here on the diagram that shows where we are today. And so a little discussion of where we are today. The first critical lens that we want to focus on is that facility utilization. So you got a perspective that we're at 200 plus facilities and that there are overcrowding issues. And this has to be factored into any kind of boundary and decision-making process going forward. Why is it important? This is an obvious answer for many of you. Maintaining reasonable class sizes and accommodating growth. The way Montgomery County Public Schools looks at utilization is to take a building and understand the number of students divided by that programming capacity, which has to do essentially with the classroom space. And that target range is 80 to 100% school capacity. You obviously don't want schools that are over 100% utilized. You also don't want schools that are under 80% utilized. You want to create that sweet spot where schools are utilized as they should be. And so what we've done is we've set out a sample cluster. This is not a cluster we're doing particular work around, and shown you, using those colors, where schools are underutilized, where they're overutilized, and where they're in that range. And so looking at Watkins Mill, what you can see is a range from 78%, just underutilized, all the way up to 129%. One of the unusual things you can see about Watkins Mill, although it does occur in other clusters, is that you have a situation, what we call an island assignment, where an elementary school will draw from a geographic area that isn't contiguous, that isn't directly adjacent. So again, you'll see on your table and in your booklets maps that start to color code these situations. And what we're doing throughout all of our lenses is looking at adjacency. we're not comparing one end of the county with the other. We're looking at clusters and adjacent areas. And so here, you see the entire county. Looking at elementary school zones, you see a lot of red, you see a fair amount of blue, and a little bit of gray. You see ranges of schools that are at 200% capacity, and that one is a little bit of an outlier. And then you'll see a school that is 62%, which is fairly well underutilized. You will also see that there are schools in the 80 to 100% range. That is about 1/3 of the schools, 45 out of 135 issues. So again, as we do our work, understanding utilization is a critical concern. I should add to this slide, and you'll see it in your booklets, that any cluster that has a black, dark outline around it, those are clusters that are due for capital projects. So some of those capital projects are being conducted in clusters that have all red or some red in them to address some of those challenges. Now we take a look at middle school utilization. And here you see a better situation, although still not perfect. A lot more blue, a little bit of gray, and a fair bit of red. And here you have schools that are up to 124% utilized. So over that 100% mark, but not nearly as extreme as the elementary schools. And there are some that are down as low as 67% utilized. And in this case, we have 23 of 40 middle school areas that are in that proper utilization range. And then finally, looking at high schools, you see that about half of the high schools are in that proper utilization range. But you see in the western part of the district in particular, some real challenges around utilization. And so again, just to summarize this information and all of our work, and through your comments, we will go deeper into understanding of utilization. You can see that summary of the elementary school situation, the middle school situation, and the high school situation. And as we look at this issue, and as we want you to start looking at it, it's to try and understand those adjacencies. Where do you have the gray zones next to the red zones? What do we think is happening in those areas? What kind of feedback do you have for us about school utilization as part of this analysis? What else should we be looking at? So we're going to ask you now to take some time to work at your table. Go ahead, Steve.
Right. Thanks, Adam. So as Adam said, you may want to refer to what's in your booklet, which is what Adam just presented. You also have the big table map. We're asking you two basic questions in a 10-minute time period. So again, you're going to have to be very concise at the tables in sharing your ideas. But one is, what feedback do you have in terms of what Adam just shared, in terms of what you're seeing on the maps and in the booklets about the school utilization part of this analysis? And what else should we include in this analysis as part of this part of the analysis? So wanting your input and feedback, I'm going to ask that we just take 30 seconds silently to jot something down on the worksheet so you have something ready to share at the table as the table facilitators take you around, and then you can jump into the conversation. So you'll have 10 minutes for this conversation.